Mesut Ozil is a player that divides opinion, it's fair to say. But amongst some of the greatest footballers ever to play the game, it's interesting to discuss whether he could be up there in terms of his influence on the game. We're going to discuss Ozil and a lot more in terms of a fantastic new book that's been written by a good friend of the show, Johan Driscoll. So let's crack on with it. Hello, John. How are you doing? Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. I mean, let's go straight into things. You've written a book. Is the most sort of simple way to start the show off, I suppose. Do you want to just give the listeners a little bit of the background around what the book is, and yeah, just talking about it, basically.
Yeah, so I've always wanted. It's always been an ambition to write a book. Obviously, I've done a lot of broadcasting work over the years and bits and bobs of writing for magazines and websites and stuff. But so the ambition was to write a book. I'm a big fan of football history, so that's what I wanted to do. And then I thought the best format, it was a little bit, the 100 objects, history of the world through 100 objects,
Yes.
Neil McGregor from the British Museum came up with. So that was the starting point. 100 was too many, and I thought objects too boring, because football is a game of players. So it's essentially 50 mini biographies to tell the story of football. That's more or less what it is. But then the influential part comes in, because I want them to, they have to do a job for me, to get in there. I mean, all the greats are in there. Messi, Pele, Maradona, Cruyff, they're all there. Those guys, just by being as good as they were, by being the best footballers of their era, and or all eras in some cases, are worth their place. But you also have to tell a bit of the story, so you have to have had some influence. So there are some people in the book who aren't great. Jean-Marc Bosman, who'd heard of him as a footballer before he took his case to the European court and changed the whole way that football operated. So there are a few people like him. Justin Fashanu was in there, for example. He's the only high-profile gay footballer who played his career with everybody knowing that he was gay. Obviously, Robbie Rogers came later, very, 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 very different and more positive story. But Justin Fashanu was in there. Again, Justin was a very promising player, but then after, for the last 2/3 to 4/5 of his career, he was a massive underachiever. So you're there to tell a story. You're there partly because you're influenced, or you're there sometimes just to represent a bit of the football history, because every World Cup is covered, or the major European events, the strong periods of teams. For example, I wanted someone from the great Milan team of the late 80s into the 90s had to be there. Someone from the great Barcelona team under Pep Guardiola had to be there. The first branch of the Real Madrid team that was the first dominant team in European football, they are there. So that's what the 50 people are chosen for, the part that they've played in football history. Have they got an interesting story? Do they allow me to keep telling the story of football?
Yeah, for me, like, obviously speaking as a younger fan, we were joking off air before about talking about some of the Arsenal players that I wasn't able to watch, being the age I am, and it's something that I feel any football fan of any club is kind of, in a way, compelled to, with the need to look back and witness the football that they missed and understand the story of where we've got the game and why it is what it is today. And I think the book kind of goes into the key elements of different players, but as you said they're players that not necessarily, some of them weren't amazing. Like, we've got the Ronaldos and the Messis in there, but also ones which have such a key cornerstone part of the footballing history. And that, when obviously we're talking about this on an Arsenal-focused channel, and you apologised pre the show about the lack of Arsenal representation, because some people might go, I mean, I suppose the easiest question to ask from an Arsenal perspective is, maybe, from my perspective, it's easy to ask, but from your perspective, maybe harder to answer. But Arsenal have had a hell of a lot of sort of influential players in their own history. You think of Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, you go further back, talking about like Mickey Thomas, Alan Smith, David Rocastle, go even further back than that. And you're looking at those types of players. Why isn't there more Arsenal in the book, would you say?
That's the nub of the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. And this is not just blowing smoke. It was agonising not to put Thierry Henry in. I did a lot. I did a lot of radio back. I did Talk Sport, and then I did Five Live in the late Highbury days, where I did a lot of the Invincibles season. Thierry Henry was the most beautiful footballer I have ever seen. So it was agony not to put him in. Just didn't help me tell the story, essentially. Yeah. So the nearest miss, now very real proper students of Arsenal history will say, well, what about Alex James in the 30s? Why wasn't he? Just because Stanley Matthews' story crushed his. Stanley Matthews is the most famous player of that era. So in a sense, he won that battle. If you're writing a story of managers, you obviously have Herbert Chapman in there, because he definitely changed the game, and not Huddersfield and then Arsenal, so he was massively influential. So I couldn't sort of squeeze an Arsenal player into then. So Viv Anderson is in, but the truth of Viv Anderson being in, he's in there because he's the first black England footballer, which I think was a really significant event, and also because that Nottingham Forest team of the extraordinary Nottingham Forest team. I know it's not a Nottingham Forest channel, but they did come up from they came from the second division. They won the league. They won the European Cup. They won the European Cup again. Viv Anderson was in that team, and then funnily enough, Viv's career is almost a series of near misses after that, because he joins Arsenal under Don Howe, and then he leaves. He's one of the first players that George Graham gets rid of. So he's not. So he was there in that literally roped together defence. So he's in that, and then but he goes to Manchester United and he joins Alex Ferguson, and he leaves before they get good as well. So it's sort of extraordinary series of of near misses, and he only won 30 international caps. So it's in a sense, the players chose themselves, and then I sort of look back, and then Arsenal was probably the most painful one, where I'm looking and thinking it's probably not enough Arsenal in there. And also the Arsenal player who is in there for his Arsenal career is Mesut Ozil, who it's a story of disappointment. It is a story of the modern Premier League and what didn't happen in his career.
I mean, you've mentioned him, so you may as well we've kind of put aside a fair chunk of the interview to talk about him, because he obviously is the main Arsenal representative in the book. Let's begin kind of in the positive side of him, because at both Germany in sort of his younger years and at Real Madrid and prior to that Werder Bremen in the Bundesliga as well, he was a generational talent. Like, we look now at some of the young players coming through, like you look at the Mbappes, etc., the young guys coming through, and when he was first bursting onto the scene, that's the level that he was being looked at as this is going to be the next world-beating midfielder. What do you look at the kind of career that he had at Madrid was perfect? So he had maybe the perfect coach for him under Jose Mourinho, who eventually they fell out, of course. And then he had the perfect kind of guy to feed in Cristiano Ronaldo. So when he was there, was it the perfect fit for the player that he was, do you think?
Yeah. And he was a brilliant player, Ozil. He really was. And my son is now, he's 13. He doesn't get that Ozil was a brilliant player. And it's amazing how it goes. How it just gets forgotten how talented he was. Because I first saw him play a full game was probably the 2010 World Cup, where I didn't want to. I'm diplomatic in the but I was reluctant to call Gareth Barry a cart horse, but
that was the time where Gareth Barry was kind of dragged into the England team at the last minute, wasn't it?
Yeah, and he gets in a one-on-one race with Ozil on one of the goals where Germany break away, and it's honestly it's like a racehorse and a cart horse. I can't remember what I put in the end. It was something slightly more diplomatic than that. Yeah. And then of course he went to Real Madrid, as you said. He had a relatively controversial career in Germany. He obviously can be quite difficult to get on with. He's got his firm opinions, but so he went to Real Madrid, and they loved him at first, and they found a role for him. I think it's probably the crucial thing, isn't it, with Ozil? You have to. He's not someone who just do a job. You can't just stick him on the right wing and think, fill in there, Mesut, or we need you to drop deep and do a job in midfield. He can't. You've got to find a role for Ozil. So they found a role for him, and Mourinho found a role for him. Cristiano loved him. He was the top assist maker, cleverly dropping into that number 10 position. So he didn't do an awful lot of defending. He was clever. He was given his leeway, and then third season, what we used to say third season Mourinho. Mourinho, he turned on everybody, and it was extraordinary. Mourinho's collapse at Real Madrid from having won his battles in the first year. I mean, this is very briefly covered in the book. He won his battles in the first year, won the league in the second year, went to war with everybody, the media, UEFA, the club, the players, and he called Ozil a coward in a dressing room. I mean, you think, what? It's like, so where's all your delicacy and man management and looking after this guy? He's obviously a guy who needs looking after, Mesut Ozil. So they were looking to get rid of him because they Mourinho went, but in a sense, people had gone off Ozil a bit, so he was no longer as revered as he had been in the first year or so that he was there, and so he was therefore up for grabs. And as I'm sure your listeners or your viewers are aware, the Arsenal felt under a lot of pressure to splash some cash to get a top grade player into the club, and he was available for that. So he made sense. It made sense. They paid an awful lot of money for him, but then they had money. They hadn't been spending money. There'd been this notion of saving cash for this notional future project, but which just in my view didn't work. Everything says about Arsenal's recent history. And Wenger, I've read. Have you read? I presume most people. I've read.
What I did was I bought the book and I bought the audio book so he could read it to me.
There is an awful lot of self-justification going on in that book, isn't there? Of Wenger. By the way, everybody buy my book first and then Wenger's second. And so there was a lot of, we had to do it this way. We were building sensibly for the future, but the trouble is, Arsenal were building sensibly for the future. The world was going crazy, and so the world didn't stay still. So it's almost like you're in some kind of house price boom going on, and you're thinking, no, I'll just sit in my little 1-bedroom bungalow. It's the sensible thing to do. But the world didn't wait, and so everybody else who speculated, not everybody else who speculated because they didn't, because Deportivo La Coruña, for example, in Spain, they speculated. Now they're in the third tier of Spanish football because they went bust. So Wenger would say, I got that one right. But so it made sense for Arsenal to go after Ozil when they went after him. And again, you forget, I think people, when they write Ozil's story, he was good for a while. He got a lot of assists, and that was always the Ozil thing. There was always going to be a limited acceptance of him in England, because he's never going to. He doesn't chase lost causes. If he chased lost causes, and if he'd banged his chest, and if he'd put in a couple of reducers pointlessly,
cult hero,
that does matter. It really does matter, not just within the fans of any club, but in the general wider analysis of him, because you're being analysed by ex-pros, and they're very influential. They influence people's perception of a player, and the perception of Ozil. I think the really harsh one is he's lazy, which is, I think, is a harsh assessment of him. He's a player whose confidence drains out of him quickly, and doesn't quite grasp the element of the game of running around putting tackles in. And so he started well, but then he declines with the team's decline, and he's in the book because he's a representation of the downside of the Premier League. There was loads of upside of the Premier League, and I'm sure you've got people who watch this from other parts of the world who are massively impressed by the Premier League and the excitement and all of that. The downside of it is the extraordinary sums of money that are thrown around stupidly, with no regard, with if no planning, no proper scouting. And the big clubs are the most guilty of this. And I think Arsenal were guilty of that in that period as well, of just chucking money around. And so Ozil was that. But then, of course, the real twist in the tail with Ozil is when they give him the renewal. That is, in a sense, is what that will seal his fate as a failure.
Yeah. Because when you give a player £350,000 per week, you expect a performance of £350 per week, not just once every month, but every single week. And before he even signed that, Ozil wasn't putting on those performances every single week anyway. And I think for a lot of fans, that was a case of he's someone that can create a game-winning moment in any game at any time, but it's like a lottery because it's not always going to happen. And if the game doesn't necessarily suit him, it's just not going to happen. And I think that when Arsenal lost Alexis Sanchez, there was a very much a huge furore around Arsenal must not fall into that trap of losing the Fabregases, the Nasris, the Van Persies. And we'd lost Alexis Sanchez, and now there was a big push for Arsenal to not fall into that trap again. And so re-signing Mesut Ozil, when arguably a player who left a year later in Aaron Ramsey should have probably been the priority for Arsenal to keep. And that's kind of left this stigma around Ozil, and especially now under Arteta, that Arteta's completely frozen this guy out, and he's put it down to what we call footballing reasons, which when you look at Arsenal now, as some people have picked up, and that's not in the style that Arteta wants. But if you're going to label his absence in terms of footballing reasons, that in my mind, whether I want him in the team or not, that in my mind seems like you are misguiding the fan base as to why he's not been included in the squad. I mean, do you feel that sense with a team that's purely lacking in creativity of why they would leave Ozil out for footballing reasons?
Yeah, I mean, it was an extraordinary re-signing anyway. It's understandable because, as you said, there were reasons behind it, and so much of the transfer spending of big Premier League clubs is rooted in fear, and everything about Ozil re-signing was rooted in fear. The Van Persie thing, it hurt Arsenal fans. You know, lots of my friends are Arsenal fans. They obviously switched on Van Persie because what we do. You blame the player, but but you know, he was snatched away for a low transfer fee and immediately went and helped a pretty poor Man United team win the league, and so that hurt. Sanchez was they managed to have. Sanchez was. We forget how good Alexis Sanchez was, don't we? For a couple of years there, so that was coming up, and so it's understandable that they panicked, but it was a massive panic with Ozil, because the truth of the matter is, you're right, he was never a week in, week out player. He is always a player who will, when the time is right, if the manager loves him and all of these things, he will then potentially deliver, never stake your mortgage on it. And so what you had, though, because then Wenger left a short time afterwards, who effectively done the deal.
It's like a father figure for him as well.
Yeah, so. And you had Unai Emery, who didn't really ever seem to know what to do with him or to have a plan. And he's not an Unai Emery kind of player. And Unai Emery's now at Villarreal doing quite well, and with a couple of fancy Dan players in his team, but they're not central to his team. They're not playing them £300,000 or £325,000 a week, and so he's got the leeway to chuck him in when you like. Yeah. And again, with Arteta, it's a maddening situation, isn't it? Because I have some sympathy with Arteta in that he didn't sign Ozil. He's been handed this player, and he sort of thinks, I don't know what to do with him. He doesn't fit the way I want to play. But on the other hand, he's paid £325,000 a week, and you sort of think, can you not find a place for him in the team? Yeah. So it's just extraordinary. That's why he's the story of the Premier League, Mesut Ozil, isn't it? Because the money counts. But if everything was equal, he'd have gone back to Germany. That's probably where he'd be, isn't it? And playing at Werder Bremen, or somewhere where he's happy. That's where he would be. And now he's turned into this sort of extraordinary social media campaigner, campaigning.
It's unreal. This I can't believe that. Yeah.
But weirdly, perhaps you could argue one of the most serious issues in the world, which is the treatment of the weak, as in China. So he's vocal on that tick. And Gunnosaurus, and jumping on the old Twitter before Arsenal play a European game, or Arsenal play, go on the boys.
Every game. Yeah. He's back in Aubameyang now in the whole Cruyff dilemma as well.
So it is just an extraordinary situation. And the sad thing from Arsenal's point of view is that this great club has been caught up in that, and it's almost like a club has almost voluntarily slipped away from the elite of European football. From 2006. Toss up not to win the Champions League that season. That game could easily have gone the other way. The Invincibles, as I say, such a beautiful team. Henry as the lead, Perez, and all of that. To move away to a situation where, and you can blame it on other clubs having rich owners. Arsenal's got a rich owner. It's just rich owner who doesn't want to put his money
Yeah.
into the club
It's
and
changing
it
a
around.
little bit now, but
Yeah,
I know exactly what you mean.
but now it's where you've got to make decisions. You've got to move quickly, haven't you, in this game? And other teams were chucking it around at a time that you're allowed to. And Wenger was playing by a different game, wasn't he? He was 10 years in the past trying. We'll steadily build our way forward and all of that. And it's just sorry, but no one else was playing by those rules.
I think like when you talk about like the ownership, I suppose at Arsenal, next summer is going to be really interesting because Ozil's out of contract, and so he goes. I mean, there's no way that Arsenal are going to tell him, "Oh, you know what? We're going to give you another year." That's just not going to happen. And then you've got the likes of Mustafi and Socrates and David Luiz, are all also going to be out of contract, and you've got kind of this situation next summer where there's a lot of wages that are going off the books that Arsenal now have the potential. And listening to David Ornstein speak the other day, he said that Arsenal are already kind of planning well ahead of this window, the targets that they want to look at. They signed Thomas Partey, who is an unbelievable. I mean, you came on the show previously and talked about how much of an unbelievable signing he is for the club. But in terms of Ozil, and the whole point of this book is it's around them being influential. It's not the best 50 players of all time. It's about their impact on the game of football. And as you said, Ozil does kind of sum up in both senses of both the Premier League and Arsenal a decline. And we've kind of seen it with La Liga recently, and maybe the slight decline of La Liga's impact on European football. I mean, you look at the semi-finals of the Champions League last season, there was no Spanish side in the semi-finals. So when you look at the impact of Cruyff, which is kind of the last 10 minutes I want to spend selfishly on a bit of Barcelona, and I'm an Espanyol kind of follower in Spain because I love the side of the underdog in Catalonia, and I'm a bit of I don't really like Barcelona at times, but you couldn't not like Barcelona's style of football, especially when Cruyff kind of instigated everything at the beginning, and then Pep eventually years later readapted it and retook that on and took it on from Rijkaard. So let's focus on Cruyff initially, because I don't know if this is going too far, but I'd argue he's been one of maybe the most influential, in my opinion, on football.
Yeah. He was when I had the idea for the book, he was the first name on the team sheet. Johan Cruyff, he was. Yeah. Now, because it's about players, not managers, I don't massively go into detail of his managerial career, but he was hugely successful as a manager as well. So it's as a player he comes through. So to measure the level of success of Cruyff, when he was one of the first professional players to sign for Ajax, which is an extraordinary thing to think, isn't it? In the 60s, and by the early 70s, they win 3 consecutive European Cups. What an extraordinary, the Dutch had never done anything in world football. They were probably what you'd expect of the size of nation that they were. Why would Holland be a major footballing nation? But they became one, and it was Rinus Michels as well. So it wasn't just Cruyff. Feyenoord had a good team as well. It wasn't just Ajax. They were doing lots of things right, but Cruyff was the embodiment, and he was a man with a passion for a style of football. And boy, it is written everywhere. My son plays football, so I go and watch Oxford City juniors play, and they are playing like a Cruyff team. It's extraordinary. It's all over. And it's not just because the coach, wants to do that. That's how they get taught now. And so Cruyff's influence, I mean, there's a case, you get Sam Allardyce or Neil Warnock on here, and they'll say, "Oh, rubbish." But there is Cruyff's influence has swept the world. So that is that story from Cruyff and all of his achievements and all of his downsides. His downsides were mainly what a curmudgeonly person he was. If you read Cruyff's autobiography, which is on that pile there is a load of stories where he falls out with people and it's always their fault. And after about 5 of these stories, thinking, you know what, Johan, you are the common factor in all of these disputes that you keep having with everybody. But he was fascinating. He had a philosophy, which is not something that many people have brought to the world of football. Most people, and you can argue it. I've got a mate of mine who's an Arsenal fan who will be older than you, a bit younger than me, who actually thinks he likes 1-0 to the Arsenal. He thinks Arsenal should go back to playing that way.
We're trying.
But Cruyff brings this philosophy, and then it follows through. So you're able to draw a line. A few times to try and draw a line between, and so the obvious line is then into that Barcelona influenced team. So he was then. He was the manager, what we call the Barcelona Dream Team, and they won 4 leagues in a row, and the 1992 European champions with Ronald Koeman, ironically, not ironically actually, but scoring the goal. Again, it's another link to the current Barcelona. It's not straightforward. It goes up and down, and they have their ups and downs. And when Pep Guardiola comes back, it all fuses together beautifully, and it fuses together beautifully with the Luis Aragonés. It was the Spain manager at the time, the controversial, remember, infamous for making a racist remark that was picked up on a camera. Yeah. People who knew him defend him. I can't really judge on that. But it fused in with what the Spanish FA was doing. They had a load of good players coming through at La Masia. So I then had a choice in my book, of course. You got to do that Spain team. I've never seen a better team in international football.
It's ridiculous. And it's amazing how you got 2 polarizing sides of Barcelona and Real Madrid coming together so synergetically. So
that was fascinating. They had all these little guys playing, but they won 3 major competitions in a row in an era in which it was very difficult to do it. And it's rare, loads of World Cups. And when you really look carefully at the World Cup, you find quite often the World Cup is just won by a team that rides its luck. The Euros next year, there doesn't look to me like a special team about to win the Euros, but someone will keep everybody fit. They'll have a tactical plan that works, and they'll get there. And then we'll write the legend for them afterwards. But Spain 2010, it was written in advance. Could they do it? Yes, they did. At times, they ground it out in truth, doesn't it? Because that's football, and nothing is ever quite as beautiful as it seems. So they had to be in it, and then had Xavi and Iniesta as the choice. So you make that choice within those two greats.
Towards Xavi.
Yeah,
I think that's just the liking of that type of midfielder, though. Just the fulcrum of passing within the team.
Yeah, he was the brains of it, wasn't he? Iniesta was the beautiful, elegant player, on a par with Thierry Henry, actually, for his elegance as a player, for making it look easy. But Xavi was the brain. So Xavi was the inspiration. So Xavi was the one who knocked Cruyff's legacy on. Funnily enough, Guardiola, because Messi's in the book, obviously, Guardiola says Messi is Cruyff's greatest alumni because of the way he plays the game. Not sure, because Messi is a hugely individual player as well. I mean, he's brilliant in every regard of the game. Messi is mind blowing, but he's not part of a system. They designed the system around Messi. Obviously, why you would do that, wouldn't you? It seems an obvious thing to do.
You just would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I think when you look at it's the way that it was all brought together, of course. I mean, what's interesting as well, and kind of looking at the list, is that there isn't the first person you put on that list is Xavi from that kind of era, and then it goes to Messi. And I suppose it was difficult not to say put Iniesta on it, and it might have been difficult. But when you've put Xavi, you kind of cover both just by putting Xavi in a way. Is that there's no one from the not no one, but there's no one I look at that while Xavi crossed over generations from the kind of Rijkaard part where they first won that European trophy against Arsenal. Why did you not lean towards, say, a Ronaldinho type of player?
A major effect on the game, essentially. So that is sort of influence levels. He was a wonderful player, Ronaldinho, and a joy. When you sat down and watched Ronaldinho, you thought, what's he going to do? He gets the ball. Oh, great, the ball's gone to Ronaldinho. So obviously he was a World Cup winner. But you have a choice. So I've already got 2 Brazilians of his era in there, because Ronaldo, the Brazilian Ronaldo. When you finish watching this, treat yourself, go back and watch highlights of Ronaldo, the Brazilian Ronaldo, playing a season for Barcelona. He was only there 1 season. Unbelievable. Yeah, the speed at which the man ran with the ball, the skill that he played with. So we end up, a bit like Ozil, we end up, discussing what legend is left. Ronaldo was left with this legend of this injury hit guy who couldn't control his weight. Terrible tragedy. Well, not tragedy. He's alive and well. But it's a real shame that we lost that player who was every bit as good as Messi and Ronaldo, Cristiano, in his early days. So in a sense, Ronaldinho, I couldn't squeeze him in. And that Barcelona team, for all that Barcelona team that beat Arsenal then, was very, very good. they didn't redefine football. So that's essentially my argument, that Rijkaard's team, he essentially put a very, very good team together. They had some fun players like Deco. It was I enjoyed that team. Yeah. But it was the one that really fused in with Aragonés's Spain team that changed football. When I'm watching Oxford City kids playing, they're not playing like a Rijkaard team. I don't know what a Rijkaard team is. They're playing like they're trying to play like a Cruyff team.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted, because I just look back and I know that a lot of friends of mine, because I sent them the list and the name that came through for them that was missing was Ronaldinho. So, because a lot of them would look at him as saying that he was the most, some people I know consider him, say, he had more ability than most of all players ever, just of how good he was on the ball. So to kind of sorry, did you want to jump in there?
No, I was literally, if it was a question of the best 50 players of all time, he'd be in. But then I think that list is even harder to write than this one, because then you get into that the unsolvable dilemma of, was Stanley Matthews better than Ronaldinho? How can you possibly?
You can't tell because of the different eras. Like, it's impossible to get. It's like, and that comes into so many others. Like the debate between who's better between Maradona and Messi is kind of in that same sense too. And so let's end the show with the greatest debates of who has been more influential on football. And this is gonna hurt. But Messi or Ronaldo?
So Lionel or Cristiano?
Lionel,
right.
Yeah.
So to sum it up, essentially, Cristiano Ronaldo is the new Stanley Matthews. Right. Stanley Matthews did more work at his football than anyone of that era. So at the time, no one else was. He ate salads. He drank homemade smoothies. He did strengthening work for his core. So he was lifting. He was doing squats. He was out practicing his crossing. He was unique, and that's why he played on till he was 50. Extraordinary. That's what Ronaldo is. Ronaldo is this guy who has brought a new level of dedication, and I wonder whether in the future Ronaldo will be, that all footballers will look like Ronaldo in 30, 40 years' time. Wenger says not. Wenger says that we've reached a peak of physicality in football. I'm not sure I agree, because there is that peak of, I know they all work much harder than they did a short while ago, and certainly they did 30, 40 years ago. But Ronaldo, I don't know. I think Ronaldo is the new template. Messi is different. You can overstate this. We massively overstate it as if Messi doesn't practice, as if Messi doesn't work hard, as if Messi's a vegan in the season, not because, not for any kind of environmental reasons or philosophical reasons. It's just because it's just because he wants to be healthier. So that's the level of dedication of Messi. Messi will be remembered forever. So in terms of your friends saying, where's Ronaldinho in this list of the 50, obviously you couldn't miss them out. But if in the future, if in 50 years' time someone says, right, name 3 footballers from this era, could you miss out Ronaldo? Possibly. You'd never miss out Messi.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting, isn't it? Because in my mind, just the level of goals, and I know what you're talking about in terms of like the sculpting of the perfect athletes that Ronaldo is, and the way that he works hard, and whereas Messi is very much, he's always been this talented and he hasn't had to work because he is just naturally that amazing player, whereas Ronaldo's had to kind of work to be able to be that good, I suppose, which is always that argument. But then coming from a different perspective, people would say that makes Ronaldo even better, because that whilst he's been able to match someone as talented as Messi because of the work that he's put into the game. Now, whilst I'm not a huge Barcelona fan, you can't, in my opinion, look past Messi as the greatest. But it's a debate that will go on forever. But I think it's interesting that you say about 3 players that, say in 50 years' time, that you wouldn't hark back to. I think that's wildly controversial about maybe not including Ronaldo in those 3. So if you would say those 3 influential players from this era, so from the last decade and a half, what 3 players with Messi would you choose as to round things off?
I would choose Cristiano. The only way in which I wouldn't. The only way in which you wouldn't is if you had to choose one era, one player from this, which essentially I've done for Giuseppe Meazza. I had to choose one player to represent the rest of the world in the 30s. So so you look back you look back from with a long historic lens on it. Are we in the Messi era? Are we in the Ronaldo era? Obviously, we're in the Messi Ronaldo era.
Yes.
But if you're forcing me to choose, so it would definitely be those two. And then I guess I guess I've made my choice, haven't I? Ronaldo, Brazilian Ronaldo, because he was also, he was part of an underrated, I think, Brazil team that wins the 2002 World Cup. It was an incredible comeback from him personally after what happened to him after he had the fit before the 1998 final, which was an amazing story, extraordinary episode. And then
he spent Carlos that found him.
Yeah. And then he spent 3 years largely on the treatment table because he had a career-ending knee injury. They actually came up with new medical techniques to get him back on the pitch again. He came back. He'd only played a few games, played a handful of full games before he went to the 2002 World Cup, and a massive effect on it. Struggled with his injuries after that, but was part of the Galacticos team. There's actually, for all, I apologise, all Arsenal fans, there aren't enough Arsenal players in it, but there are more, and you might not like this as well, Tom, there are more Real Madrid players than anything else in this. But purely because they just bought them, there aren't that many. They basically went round buying all the best players in the world. They were almost like they predicted who was going to be in the book of the most influential players. Now, I'll have him and him and him and him.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ronaldo, that Brazilian Ronaldo, both Ronaldos and Messi.
Both Ronaldos and Messi, yeah. I will look at this list and always cry that Thierry Henry is maybe not there. But I completely get the argument that you put forth about the players, and I completely understand why Ozil is included on the list as well in terms of being influential. I think that there will be some that maybe will struggle to kind of understand why Ozil was on there. But as we've said and we've maintained throughout this chat, is that it's not about the 50 best players. No, it's about the influence of those players on the game, and I think that Ozil does represent that stage especially in the Premier League of his signing. But thank you, John. I have left a link in the description if people would like to pick up the book and find out the other 50 or of the 50 influential players of all time. It's an amazing story of looking into the different intricacies of each player and how football has grown over time, and I'm sure it's a real pleasure for you to research and get all the information and get it together. But thank you, John. Really appreciate your time.
No, my pleasure, Tom. I'm glad Thomas Partey is working out so far, having recommended him so heartily to you.
Yes, I mean, it was quite funny. I had a couple of people message me of the tactical breakdown you did in January, where it's like, he's never going to come. he's never going to sign. And of course, as is the way with football, it's weird that ends up happening. But every word that you spoke about Partey, every bit of research that I've done since and put out to the listeners has now come true in the short space of time that we've already had him. So unbelievable stuff. And maybe in 50 years' time, he could end up being one of the most influential players for Arsenal and maybe in a revolution of turning things around. We will have to wait and see. But thank you again, John. As I said, the book is by Pitch Publishing, and you can check it out. I have a link in the description if you want to find out about all the other players that made John's list. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have, please drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. We'll be back very soon for another show. But it's been a pleasure to speak to you, as it always is. And as always, up the Arsenal.